Welcome to the Hedgineer Podcast with your hosts, Michael Watson and Jhanvi Virani.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Hedgineer Podcast. I'm your co-host, Michael Watson.
And I'm your other co-host, Jhanvi Virani. We've got a lot of interesting topics to dig into today, so let's just dive right in. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was this headline that's been making its waves for the past 24 hours as of today, is this new AI enterprise services company that Anthropic is building out in partnership with a couple of financial institutions like Goldman. I think Apollo, Blackstone are involved as well. And essentially, from my understanding, their mission as a company is to help deploy Claude effectively into mid-sized companies and help them automate some of their most critical workflows with AI. And my understanding is that they'll be starting by working with some of the clients or some of the companies that are within like Blackstone, Apollo, et cetera's client portfolios.
Yeah, and I think that it hasn't been announced because we're just recording this on Tuesday that OpenAI is doing a similar partnership, and it looks like, at least last I read, that they were raising around $4 billion, which is compared to only the $1.5 billion that's been announced with the Anthropic partnership. And so I think that OpenAI is even trying to do it on a larger scale. And as I understand, part of that capital is going to be used for acquisition of engineering, consulting firms, or expertise in different niches of like what it's like to deploy AI within asset managers. And I don't know, Jhanvi, I think we have some expertise in that. What do you think?
Just a little.
Yeah. So, but why, based off of like the dozen or so AI deployments we've done within asset managers and hedge funds, do you think that OpenAI and Anthropic are starting to realize the opportunity that exists through these service-like engagements that we do all the time?
Well, I think that anyone that has worked on AI strategy at the enterprise level, whether they're a consultant working on helping another company adopt AI better, or they're doing something similar within their own team, you often very quickly get to the conclusion that just setting up a Claude enterprise account or setting up a Claude Teams account and expecting people to start automating the real meat of their work is an unreasonable expectation. I think that 9 times out of 10, you put something like ChatGPT or Claude into someone's hands, and they're really only replacing web search and some very basic functionality around reading emails or Slack messages, things like that. But if you're a research analyst and a big part of your job is updating your models, or you're a risk manager and a big part of your job is putting together these very complex risk reports, figuring out how to get Claude to not only do that for you, but do it in a way that's consistent with how you're doing it now is a very complicated process. And so most of the clients that we work with are the ones that are at this point in time on the forward thinking side of things, and they understand that very quickly. And they're like, trying to figure this out myself is not a good use of time. And so I think that startups tend to pave the way when new technology emerges. And so I think that most of the players in this space are startups. And I think even companies like Anthropic recognize that, right? Like they started the Claude Anthropic Partnership Network, which is specifically for consulting and AI services companies that help enterprises use Claude more effectively and get more out of Claude. And I think that the partner route is, in my mind, a much more effective one than trying to do it yourself. Just as someone we've been doing this for so long, and I'm very curious to see how these very large companies get a grasp on some of the very nimble and in the weeds challenges that come with these types of deployments.
Mm-hmm. But there is a huge unlock that happens from the model provider side, because if your only consumption for AI is based off of what your analysts prompt into either ChatGPT Enterprise or in Claude.ai or Claude Cowork, there's only so many tokens they're going to consume because they can't necessarily parallelize that work. They're not able to build complex workflows where many different data sources are being pulled in, passed to the language model for inference. Some derivative product is come back, and then you go back to the language model for inference. And so the amount of spend that you see at novice AI implementations is also relatively small. But there is a huge unlock that happens when you start running more agentic workflows and there's more parallelization that happens as you get more sophisticated with AI that is tightly coupled to increased token consumption. And so as you get more adoption of AI, there is a economic benefit of model providers to be able to see their revenue numbers continuing to increase, especially in the enterprise segment, which is where the biggest unlock is right now. Like the consumer space, I think, is really important and people are going after it. But like the enterprise segment, Anthropic has shown that there is almost an insatiable appetite for that right now. And by working with a firm like Hedgineer, there's I don't know who else is like us that are specialized in a niche, that we unlock that spend and that value from language model providers, but that directly corresponds to dollars going back to the language model providers as well in the form of compute. But then there's also, I think, this interesting element where perceived value from our client's perspective is split between both like the service provider as well as the AI model provider, where when we're deploying out agentic workflows within a client and it's done through the lens of like Hedgineer is helping accomplish that using an Anthropic enterprise license, the role between like the Hedgineer as the service provider and the model provider, it's somewhat ambiguous of where that value lies. Like, is it lies like the application layer or the service provider where we're doing that last mile and making the magic happen? Or is it coming from the underlying language model provider that have done all of the excellent work of pre-training and giving us this incredible intelligence at a relatively reasonable price, oftentimes very subsidized? And from the client's perspective, when they start seeing magic, where is that value psychologically attributed to? And in the episode that we just had with Neil, we talked about, does the language model get like a cost plus valuation where it's just the cost of compute and serving tokens plus a little bit of a margin on top? Or is it value-based valuation from what's just the net value that's being produced from the client's perspective? And we're in this interesting position where we kind of see the cost plus model kind of playing out because we can arbitrage against different language model providers. But then because we come to the table with expertise and taste for how this intelligence needs to be applied in research workflows, within risk workflows, within post-trade workflows, investor relations, marketing, fund accounting, treasury management workflows, that our taste at that point is where a lot of the value creation actually happens, even though we're standing on the shoulders of giants with the underlying language model providers that have given us this almost genie in a box. We just have to figure out how to run it with rubber hand and the right incantation. And I see this development of the development company or whatever the name is, as well as the partnership with Anthropic, as being a recognition of if you can own that last mile and also have that last mile be a split between services and software, it means that you also own that accretive value change that happens on top of the model providers, as well as the valuation of what happens with the cost plus model with tokens. So by owning kind of this both service and software, or service and token model providing element, they're able to say like, hey, wherever you think that value chain lies, we're ultimately servicing the whole thing.
Yeah. I see that point, but at the same time, I recognize the fact that time and resources, even at these giant companies that are raising like ridiculous amounts of money, like is limited, right? I think that the decision to shut down more consumer-facing initiatives at OpenAI, like Sora or like the in-app checkout or all of those things, like that's a very clear signal that they need to prioritize the things that make them the most revenue, make them the most, I guess, valuable model provider on the street, and they win this race that they're all competing in. And so for me, like, yes, I think that owning that last mile has value. I don't think that has nearly enough value as optimizing the models themselves, building a better harness for those models. And the same way that SaaS companies are now pivoting towards building towards building for agents, right? Like Salesforce is building for agents now. I think that these model providers are building for developers and consulting firms, right? They're not building for enterprises directly. There is a plethora of companies like ours across different industries, and they bring taste because they know a specific sector better than anyone else. They've worked in technology, orthogonal to AI, before AI in this space. We understand what our clients need, and we also have the luxury of spending enough time with them to figure all of that out. And so from my perspective, I think that's a frontier model spending time on what we're doing seems like a suboptimal use of time when they could be focusing on reducing model costs. Because in your analogy, in your description, I think you're exactly right. Like, if you are able to effectively deploy Claude or OpenAI within an enterprise institution and really start automating the complex processes that would generate the revenue that they would want within your compute costs, like, that is a win for them regardless of whether they own the deployment or not, right?
Totally. And I'm not saying that they don't want to develop this skill organically, because like developing the deployment of AI alongside taste within a given domain is very time intensive, right? Like we had to spend our entire careers in order to develop some element of taste that if you try to organically reproduce that, it's just very time consuming. And so like being able to say like, oh, I want to now own that last mile and organically develop that capability. Yes, they absolutely don't want to do that, which is why at least the read is that additional investment is used for inorganic capability development. So go in and acquire like companies that look, rhyme, maybe smell a little bit like Hedgineer, and then scale them, use them to be able to drive adoption within AI, within that enterprise, and then over time, replace them with AI themselves. And so I do think it is like this temporary window of time where these more human-driven implementation, consulting firms like ours have a very important role to play that's semi-human labor intensive. I mean, a lot of what we do is already automated as best we can with AI, but that's on a window of maybe, let's say 2 to 5 years. And then once you're able to get that integration into these enterprises, the role of these service providers, implementers starts going away. It's very well known if you wanted to start a new company or you are going to like, you have an SMB, how all of this integration works. It's common knowledge. So you don't need to have this kind of service arm. You also have a lot of AI agent and frameworks already developed. So 5 years from now, it's not necessarily needed. I see this as just a method of inorganically accelerating adoption within the enterprise. And doing it, the inorganic piece, I think, for me is really interesting, but I think that's also just interesting in general.
Yeah. Like Apple built the App Store. They didn't build all of the apps. If they built all of the apps, the App Store probably would not have been as successful or useful as it immediately became, because people that were experts in XYZ were building apps for XYZ for people that were interested in XYZ. Like, that's how you build a good product. And so I'm very curious to see how this evolves and whether it truly provides the value that it wants to, you know?
Mm-hmm. And so what else has been interesting over the last week? One of the things I found interesting was the upgrade of GPT 5.4 to 5.5. It doubled the cost. So I think it went from like $2.50 per million tokens to $5 per million tokens. And OpenRouter came out with a analysis of the different consumption that are going through OpenRouter of the newer model, and found that while, yes, costs increase, the actual amount of tokens that are coming out of 5.5 is reduced. I don't know the exact number. Let's say it's like 25, 30%, which means that it's all else equal is more information dense, more concise. And I think that that's actually rather interesting. And that also reduces the cost, right? Costs still go up, but they don't go up by 100%. They maybe go up by like 60% because the actual amount of tokens that are coming out of the model are less. And therefore the cost in terms of net token expenditure is lower. And which I think is great. And I think that a lot of times we don't talk about information density in the most healthy way, because you oftentimes get this splurge of AI slop, and it's like, oh, there's a ton of content that just came out, but that same 2 or 3 page document could be more easily said within 2 or 3 paragraphs. And having models are more capable of that. I think it's pretty awesome. And I think it's an interesting way that you think about how spend is affected as models upgrade and charges change over time.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're already at a place where companies are starting to reassess the way that they're using AI as a function of their compute costs, which means that for the first time, these bills are starting to get to a point where people are really thinking about, okay, what are we using AI for? What are we not using AI for? Are we using it as effectively as we possibly can? Because this bill is starting to get closer and closer to the cost of like a full-time employee.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that this is like a great example of something that only these frontier models can solve, right? Like only they can really figure out how to optimize on cost. And so I think that this is great. And I'm sure that Anthropic will also follow suit if they haven't already started.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked about it before, but we ran a full analysis of all of our Claude Code usage across the firm and identify what's driving spend. The single biggest driver were marathon sessions where one user would keep the same Claude Code session going for weeks at a time and not realizing that all of that token bloat was carried with every single additional prompt that they were using. And they'd also upgraded to the Sonnet 1 million token context window. And so they were just burning through tokens over and over. And what also happens with that is that you don't get any of the KV caching. And so when you send the same prompt over and over and over and over to Anthropic and OpenAI, all these language model providers, they cache a lot of the tokens. And so you don't pay for anything that's a cache hit. But if you, and I think like the KV timeout is something, don't quote me, but let's say it's like 15 minutes or like 30 minutes. You have 30 minutes to pass the same tokens again. And Anthropic will say, oh, we're still keeping it. It's a cache hit. You don't have to pay for this. But if you go 30 minutes and then resubmit the same or like a new prompt in an existing Claude Code session, you're going to have a complete cache miss. And so you're repaying for all of the tokens in that session. So if you're redoing that same session for an entire week, every 30-minute window when you chose not to work and you come back to that session, that first prompt very well could be like $5, $10. And so those sessions were running up bills of just like $8,000 to $9,000 for one session for 1 month for one user, completely unnecessarily. Now, I think there's also the element of like, you can't really blame that person if they didn't ever get that feedback or that context. And also organizations are completely blind to that as well. I do find that having all of the data organized in one place for your Claude Code sessions or just for all of your AI usage in general, and then be able to run an analysis on that to be able to go a little bit deeper on what's driving costs and give tangible things that you can do to like actually like zero impact, zero quality degradation, cheap things that you can do right now to drive down costs is something that like it's also onus on the company, the enterprise, the individual to know what levers to pull outside of just relying on the language model providers to make that easier as well. I think I always draw the parallel of like Databricks and Snowflake. They never were incentivized to make their infrastructure faster or to like highlight, oh, you should actually be using a smaller warehouse to run this analytics query because it'll be just as fast, but it'll save you 10x your money because like, why would they give you 10x your money? Now they're starting to do more of that, but it's in a similar way. You don't always want to rely on the language model providers to tell you how to best optimize your queries. You can do some of that yourself. Which brings me up to another interesting thing, because we were kind of talking on the Databricks Snowflake side. Snowflake came out with their managed agent runtime most recently. They have been pushing out their MCP environment on top of the data warehouse, all built within Cortex. Have you been following any of that at all?
No.
So we had Jonathan Riggenstein on last season, and he's now gotten promoted. I don't want to blame it on the Hedgineer Podcast for giving him the boost, but he's now in charge of, like, I think, asset management and wealth services within the AI deployments for Snowflake. And one of the things we talked about is like a skill library, an agent library, when it was very early that Anthropic is rolling that out. They're not rolling out their same one. Again, I don't want to blame on the Hedgineer Podcast, but I think it is very cool to have them taking what they had originally built in Snowflake, where this is the easy button for data warehousing. Like, you maybe used to work in your SQL Server environment. Maybe you started using something like Vertica, manage it yourself in Columnar Store. Maybe you've tried with Databricks, but like, I love Databricks. We use Databricks for a ton of stuff. It's complicated. Snowflake was the easy button for scalable compute for people that could just write SQL and wanted to get work done without a whole wealth or a whole complexity of data engineering and infrastructure. Snowflake, are they now going to do that for the same thing when it comes to AI, with the managed agent runtime competing with the managed agent service for Anthropic, also competing against like Google's ADK, which I do think is kind of best in class right now for an agent harness. But again, they're the easy button. Your data already lives in Snowflake. So just starting to push that a little bit in terms of us testing. I do like what they're doing on their MCP environment. Like, so you can create the MCP, create the agent environment, create the, you already have all of your data there. And so I do find it interesting what Snow is doing right now. Like, I don't know if they're quite at a 52-week low, but like, they're looking pretty attractive. Most people are not looking at Snowflake as like the next AI platform yet. I'm, from a person that does dozens of enterprise enterprise data deployments and AI deployments, not counting Snowflake out, I think that like, if they could solve like the easy button for data platform and make that the easy button for AI, when they already have a lot of network benefits and network effect by the Snowflake data share, which is a best in class data sharing framework. And people will always tell you something novel, but it's not. Having really well structured and organized data is a prerequisite to having great AI workflows. I don't know if that's always true, because AI can do a lot along the edges, but there's still some truth to that. Snowflake has solved that crossed enterprises with their data Snowflake share, with the Snowflake share. And so combining a lot of those features together with really strong MCP infrastructure, turnkey button presses, really strong agent harnesses, scale all of that out, and predefined skill libraries and agent harnesses and agent templates, I think there's something really powerful there for the enterprise that I don't think it hasn't accelerated yet. I know that people are using it. It hasn't really been like the main thing that people are talking about for the future of AI and what's working within the enterprise. But I think that we're at an inflection point where we see some really interesting stuff happening there.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And we work on deploying agents within our clients' environment. So we appreciate the level of complexity and nuance that's there. And it's interesting because there's no clear winner on like the race of deploying enterprise agents just yet. Like, I think everyone is trying to figure it out in real time. I think that these frontier models are doing a lot on the back end to enable the creation of agents. Like, you've got APIs and SDKs that are like OpenAI and Claude driven. But if you are a non-technical user that has a Claude enterprise license and doesn't use Claude code, there's no real way to create subagents and orchestrate them to do more complex tasks. There's no way to build org-wide agents where every single person on the research team has access to a specific agent with a specific system prompt with a predetermined set of tools that it has access to. Like, none of that really exists in any enterprise offering that's the very clear winner. Like, we were just talking with one of our engineers who was on site with one of our clients, and they've been using some like agent management platform for a couple months now, and adoption is at 0, which is nuts, right? They're paying for agent building software and no one's using it. And I think the reason why is because it's unintuitive, it's difficult. There's a really high learning curve, a very steep learning curve. And if figuring out how to use the software takes more time and effort than just doing the task that I was going to automate, no one's going to use it.
And I think it's...
And if Snowflake can do that, and then also do it in a way that's connected to all of your data and all all of the ways that you're already processing it, I think that could be incredibly powerful.
Especially for, like, to your point, the way that you're already processing for firms that are already on Snowflake and they've done that heavy lift, having that there like right beside them and also the easy button, I think will be really powerful. Databricks has a similar offering. I think it's also like another for me, like I don't want to say it's a dark horse, but ADK, the agent development kit within Google, I think is probably best in class amongst all of the agent harnesses.
What does it do that the other harnesses don't do?
I think that one of the things that I really like is how they allow you to manage state within Postgres. And so what
does that mean?
Yeah. So state is all of the previous tools that were called, the user messages, the system responses that allow a language model to understand, hey, what did we do previously so that I understand how to help you next? Because language models are inherently stateless. They don't necessarily remember anything naturally. And so the only thing that it remembers is what's included in the context. And so the way that you allow a language model to remember something is that you include, hey, these are the last 10 things that you did. This is a general concept of what you're working on. And this is the task that we're trying to solve. Help me solve it by telling me what tool to call next. And that state is what I'm referring to. And so there's different ways that agent frameworks manage state. Claude Code, for example, notoriously manages all of that state in your home directory. So if you ever wanted to say like, hey, how does Claude Code manage state? You can go into your home directory, go into the .claude directory, then /projects, and each one of your directories where you've ever launched Claude Code from shows up as a folder. If you go into that, you're going to see a bunch of JSON-L files, and each JSON-L file has like 1278G654EF17, and that's the session ID. You open that up and you can read all of the different session tools, user prompts, system prompts. And so that gets resent to Claude every time that you make a request. And that's how Claude, the language model, remembers. And so Claude Code stores that in files. And when you use like Claude.ai, it's stored within like their backend database. When you do the Claude managed agent service, it's also stored within JSON files in the runtime. But what ADK does that's really nice is that they will say, like, actually, we're going to store all of those files in Postgres. So we're going to store that in a database that your enterprise is familiar with. And if you wanted to, you could go in, query them, you could modify them, you could make changes to them. And so exposing and you think of this like this represents the memory and the context in which every single agent is making a decision or doing an action in, and you could explain all of the different things and actions, successes, failures by really understanding this state. And so by making it available in Postgres, or just a simple SQL interface, it suddenly exposes all of this complexity in an intuitive way. I see a lot of other agent frameworks kind of going in this direction. So like another one that I'm a big fan of is the Cursor. The Cursor managed agent environment, like they have their own agent harness. Again, they don't expose the state of the agents very effectively. For Claude, you can do it in a read-only way where you can connect to OTel and route all of the agent state to a warehouse and then collect it and read it ad hoc, but you can't go in and modify state of an existing agent and then restart that agent, which you can kind of get at with ADK. And so by being able to have access to that, I think is just really innovative. I think that Anthropic also, like, for their credit, they know all of this. Like, nothing that I'm saying they are not intimately aware of, because even when they went into private preview of Claude Code in like Q1 of 25, they had all of these concepts built into the system from day one. So like they had all of your different conversations with the session ID. They didn't allow you to do /fork, which is awesome now, where you can just take a session, you fork it, it clones that session state on the file system and creates a new ID, so that now you can continue that conversation, but not pollute or even touch the previous session, so you can go back into it. And you could do the Claude-R to resume a previous session. So they already had the concept of session management fully baked into like their V1 release. One area that the reason why I don't think that they've come up with a organization-wide session state management system is a couple. One, there's PII in that. And so by just saying that all of your session state is inherently stored within your local machine, they don't have to worry about how it's stored and managed. I think once they go into the agent SDK and they manage that runtime, that's now a newer issue they have to deal with. I think second of all is after DeepSeek came out and they made it clear that a lot of the model was trained by distilling responses from frontier labs, mainly Anthropic and OpenAI, that by including all of this session state easily to end users, that they make it incredibly easy to create this training data and labeling data to be able to distill down into a smaller model like you might get out of DeepSeek. And so you'll see that in a couple different ways. Like I think in the default OTel in any of the OTel deployments with Anthropic, they don't give you the actual AI response. And so you can capture all of this data, but you don't get the AI response included in that. And we've asked, they actually have a couple beta flags that you can put in an OTel. But the reason is I'm pretty sure the reason is out of fear of making it too easy for a third party to be able to capture all of that data and then distill that into a smaller model, because it becomes so easy at that point. Like if you can just easily have a harness spin up couple 100,000 agents, work on a given problem space, see how Anthropic answers these problems, have an AI orchestrating all of that, you could develop all the corpus you need for distillation of many different use cases into smaller models coming from Opus trivially. And so they're at least making it a little bit more challenging in order to get all of this data centralized. Whereas with ADK, they're starting to open that up. I actually need to go back into it now to see, do they include system responses? Because they'll also have they have the same issue with Gemini. And so having all the system responses easily organized there just makes it easier to do distillation. But I do think that as organizations, for example, when we go back to the development company or this partnership with Anthropic and some of these service providers, that if they can get more comfortable owning the end-to-end deployment of AI and ownership, they'll start getting more comfortable doing some of the distillation, allowing you to maybe doing some of the distillation yourself. They probably could just do some of the distillation on their end and within their servers as well. By the way, we have this micro model just for you, distilled on top of Opus, that includes all of the training data that you've been producing over the last 5 years, and we can now serve that up to you in a micro model, much cheaper, much faster, optimized for these different workflows. So you stop routing to Opus and you start routing to these fine-tuned models. And I'm sure that they're going to be doing that. And from the end user's perspective, the only person that can do that is the one that actually owns the usage data, the telemetry data that you're producing from these workflows. And so they're the only ones that can do that anyway. So anyways, it's the quality of the tokens don't go down. The speed increases dramatically, and the cost per token, at least from the model servicer side, goes down dramatically. Whether or not they pass that down to the user is a TBD.
Yeah. And I have a lot of follow-up questions to what you're saying. And I think we're naturally kind of evolving into the main topic of this episode that we wanted to talk about, which was all about agent harnesses. So before I kind of dive deep into some of the things that you said that I'd love to kind of talk about a little bit more, let's just talk about what agent harnesses are in the most basic terms, because I think that as models have gotten much better and as enterprises are starting to invest a lot more, the term harness is showing up more than it ever has before. But I don't think that a lot of people have a really firm grasp on what it means. And I also think it's one of those terms that's starting to expand in definition, where it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
So one, for anyone that's listening this far into the podcast, of you, I appreciate that. We basically ask this same question on all of our interview questions. And so it's not saying what is an agent harness per se, but it's asking, do you understand what an agent harness is, without asking, do you understand what an agent harness is? Because all of these different coding tools are inherently harnesses. Like Claude Code is an agent harness. Codex is an agent harness. OpenClaw is interesting. That's a harness of agent harnesses. If you look at Pi, a very simple implementation, agent harness. OpenCode, agent harness. Whatever you're building server side to create agents is an agent harness. And so for me, the term agent harness, like, it is important on the second word, the harness. And like, that is something that you use to limit the actions that an agent can do in trying to control it in some way. So we have a language model, and it can produce tokens, incredibly intelligent tokens, as a function of the quality of the tokens and information that it gets. And so the harness is designed around, well, what are the tokens that we want to get back from a language model so that we can achieve various different tasks? And so one of the first things you do is you identify what are the tools that we allow an LLM to identify as relevant to being able to solve a task that it can make a decision to call out to, and choose the arguments and the way in which that tool should be used. And so a tool within, like, for example, Claude Code, they have read, they have edit. The most powerful one is bash. They'll have fetch. And so the first thing that an agent R does is it identifies what are the tools that we have, and they make it clear to the language model which of these tools will be most helpful in helping you solve an objective. And then, as opposed to you telling me the answer, you just tell me the tool to call, and then the harness will go and execute that tool call, get the results back, and then send it back to the language model to be able to determine what it should do next. In that second part, when it sends back, that's how it manages state. And so the state, as we said earlier in the conversation, language models are stateless. They don't have a memory. They don't remember anything. And so in order for a language model to remember what it previously did, it's like Memento, that movie. It immediately forgets what it did. You have to actually remind it, oh, this is what you just did, and do that by including that in tokens.
And that's what ChatGPT, like, the first time all of us used ChatGPT, it was doing exactly what you're describing. All it can really do underneath the hood is take an input of a question or a task, and it can just produce an output. And when you have a conversation with it, all it was really doing underneath the hood was appending all of the messages that you had with it before and saying, hey, this is the new question. Here's some history on all of the things the user said before. And that's it. It's just text in, text out. And a harness is essentially, one, equipping an agent to have tools to start doing things like read files, write files, modify files, for example, and the ability to actually use the model to make decisions on how to use those tools.
It's said better than I did. And then do that in a loop.
Yeah.
And allow it to continue to iterate and construct its own context. I didn't touch on giving it a goal and an actual objective that it's trying to achieve, and then the ability to determine when that objective has been accomplished. And so the harness can then do other things, like, let's say, well, we want to limit the maximum number of turns. And so if it's not able to solve a problem within a certain period of time, let's exit it. Or a harness can do memory in that state curation. So one way that the early versions of Claude Code would solve this is they would do compaction. And so you would get to when there's no more tokens allowable in the window, and when you get to that 90th percentile, Claude would then take all the states, send it off to a language model, say, like, hey, summarize this state and compact it down like 10% just for the information they need. So you lose a lot of content, but that state would get compacted. But so that state management can be really powerful. And then all the things that are built on top of that, they're essentially abstractions of one of these concepts, either better state management, better tool calling, or a better language model and system prompt in which it's trying to solve a problem. And so when we think about all the things that are built, like, let's say you want to have a language model interact with MCP, or a language model get access to skills. or a language model get access to a CLI. At the end of the day, those are just three different ways in which a tool is being described to a language model. And if a language model says, oh, I want to call out to this CLI, it's just passing back a argument in a bash tool, and it can use this CLI in order to like go and context engineer something, change some external state, and have those tokens passed back to the language model. But it's oftentimes being done in a bash tool. If you want to call a skill, like that's just a skill tool, and it can then go and say, oh, I want to call this skill, and then it's going to go look up tokens. Then maybe it's describing a workflow that you want to do to obviously update your Excel model. It's like, oh, first update this sheet with it's called sheet 1. It's your income statement. Go to the cell, likely C3, but make sure that it's the first column in the workbook, and then go down row by row until like there's 3 rows with no more data in it, and you've now parsed the entire sheet. That text is in the form of a skill. The model determines that it wants to read that into context by saying, oh, there's a skill called model update. I think I need to call that tool next, more so than any other tool that I have access to. And it just goes and gets that. The harness goes and reads that tool, pulls down the data as a string, constructs that as tokens, and passes it back to the language model. So everything that we build in terms of complexities of skills or MCPs or CLI tools are all around that concept of tools and agent harness. And then it's the same thing for doing a multi-agent system. So for example, if you do that in a very simple agent harness in a Python script, if you allow that agent harness to then be able to call out to itself recursively, it now can, now me pass to another agentic loop that can do this same thing. And then if you like any Python, like most applications can start being multi-threaded. And so then you could allow these multi-threaded applications to be able to happen in parallel. So now you have many different agents running at once. You have some way to be able to manage all of them. And that could be done at a top level events loop. That's that same agent managing a bunch of sub agents. And it creates some information around state that they all can work within. But it's still built on that agent harness. And let's say these agents need to have like cross-agent communication. They just have like one tool that would be able to share information across each other, maybe write it to a file. Or what Boris was talking about most recently at AI Ascent for the Sequoia Summit last week, they just have a lot of their agents using Slack. And so you could have multi-agent interaction by just adding you already have the Slack MCP tool to these agents and say like, oh, we actually have this channel just for agent communication. And then now these different agents can communicate with each other and just use Slack to be able to do that or write to a file. But all of these complex systems that we end up building are built on this very simple idea of an agentic loop, which is referred to now as an agent harness. And all of the different labs are creating them. Like Codex is an agent harness, and they're going to be working on OpenAI's Codex within the cloud. Anthropic has Claude Code. They now have their managed agent service. Like Google has ADK. Cursor has their agent service. AWS has Agent Core. So like Agent Core has been like Costy's their PM, and they came out with Agent Core sometime in like Q4 of last year. And what it was an abstraction on top of Lambdas, which were the first thing that people would try to deploy into because it was ephemeral compute, but just more functionality. So AWS has their Agent Core. And then you'll also have like some of your V1 versions of it, kind of like LangGraph from the LangChain project. But they all essentially do the same thing. They have different bells and whistles on top of them. And I think that for us, we don't need to build, we just need to make sure that they're all moving forward and we can integrate with the right ones for the right client. But they all ultimately have a lot of the same features, although some of them will push the needle a little bit more. For example, when ADK Google starts exposing a lot of the agent state through Postgres, which is, I think, pretty sweet.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about when you mentioned the ADK stuff was, I'm assuming it's writing to a Postgres database that everyone has access to, or admins at the enterprise have access to. So essentially, enterprises get access to all of the session metadata across their entire firm in a database. How do you think that, well, one, I think that's very similar to what we're doing with our clients. So like that, I can automatically understand the value of something like that. But for someone that's listening that doesn't clearly get that, how do you think that agent harnesses that now also have access to all of the past sessions at a company could potentially grow the capabilities of the harness itself?
So,
Like, what's the value add of that?
yeah. So I would say, well, it's kind of an interesting question. For some people that are just far enough abstracted away that they just want insights and agents and it to just work and they want the magic, they don't need to understand the agent harness. Like the agent harness is more for the people that are building, that are deep in the weeds and trying to create the magic. For the people that just want the magic, honestly, it doesn't matter. Now, where I think it does start mattering is how the agents manage memory and manage organizational knowledge and learn over time. Because the magic is lost once you see the agent make the same mistake twice after you've made some effort to correct it. And the correcting an agent, saying in a prompt, don't do that again, without a harness and a way of capturing that statement, structuring it, and making it accessible to the agent harness the next time that a similar problem presents itself. Nothing about a language model, nothing about any of this stuff enables that to just work out of the box. There needs to be some element of engineering that needs to happen within the agent product that you're using in order for an AI to remember something. And there's different ways that you can accomplish it, but like LLMs and AIs are inherently stateless. By default, they remember nothing. And so if anything, from a non-technical person's perspective, that the agent harness is able to remember and learn over time is one of the main differentiators that those non-technical users would appreciate in the differentiation of how agent harnesses can be orchestrated. Now, with that said, you could probably use the same agent harness. Like you can use ADK. You could use the Claude Managed Agent Service with Claude Code. You could use Cursor's agent harness. You could use even OpenClaw to be able to remember things with just better tool usage and data infrastructure. And so like Mem0 is one MCP tool that helps organize and structure memory so that it can be shared across the organization and remembered based off of usage. What we do is we mine all of that usage data to be able to come up with insights and memories and organizational knowledge that we can structure within a knowledge graph, put an MCP tool on top of that. And that also is like that. I think that's the industry best standard from my perspective. I'm a little biased of creating organizational knowledge and memory, but you can then, you have to expose that via a tool. You don't get it for free. So like somewhere in that agentic loop, that context of memory needs to get injected in to the next pass to the language model at inference time. And the really the only way that you have of injecting memory into that agentic loop is through a tool call. And if the majority of the tool calls that you're using within your agent harness are over MCP, that has to be through MCP. If you have the ability to call out to CLI, it can be through a CLI tool, but then the tool is going to be bash. It could be in the form of a skill where you have skills that can be dynamically updating, but that's still like a tool call. Ultimately, all three of those are the same. But like that's really the only way right now in order to be able to have AI remember and learn almost in real time, ignoring reinforcement learning. So we're not touching that. But if you want to be able to learn and remember in real time, you either do it through an MCP server that's learning and curating this knowledge based off of usage. You do it via a CLI that's ultimately wrapping the exact same thing, but with a different interface, and you're calling out to it like a bash tool. Or you're doing it in the form of skills, and you have a separate system that's automatically updating that skill library and that skill corpus almost in real time to remember these things. But those are your three options right now for memory. Unless you have like a completely new agent harness, but even then there still needs to be a tool that is developed. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get some DMs saying like, oh no, there's all these different ways, but like generally those are your three options right now for memory and state for memory management within the organization. And those tools those interfaces already exist. It's just now creating the right tools that can index that knowledge almost in real time. Sorry, I think that was kind of a lot.
No, that's good. I'm just trying to think of like what else we wanted to talk about on the subject.
Yeah. What else do we got? I mean, we have another thing that I think is really cool is Grok, GROQ got acquired last fall. No, was that the beginning of this year? I don't really know. It was the beginning of this year by NVIDIA. And they have a new architecture for like a TPU, CPU, GPU. I'm not sure exactly what they were calling it. That is optimized for inference time. Like it's blazingly fast for inference. Cerebras is another hardware provider that has an optimized chip for inference. And we actually demoed Cerebras multiple times over the last 6 months, and it is blazingly fast. And so I do think that there's an element of speed kills right now when it comes to AI. I think that you don't really notice it until you have many different workflows working at the same time and you realize that Claude's awesome, Claude's slow. Like it's great. But they're just not known for speed. And having other players that are rethinking the hardware space that are approaching inference compute in a different way is really interesting. Like I don't know exactly what their IPO valuation is going to be. I'm sure it's going to be somewhere like 20 to 50 billion. I don't know, but I'm really excited about getting some serious liquidity injection into Cerebras so that they could start doing more interesting partnerships. I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff that they could do there. So I'm excited about more, especially not getting acquired like Grok that's just going to fold into NVIDIA. I don't know if we're ever going to see like the real potential there, but I think that with something like Cerebras going public, I think that there's a lot of opportunity for disruption there.
Yeah, for sure.
Other things that are going on. I thought I think you said it a couple times, Andrej Karpathy at AI Ascent said he's never felt more behind now. He's never felt more behind as a programmer than he feels right now. And I just find that exciting. I find that the moats are drained. The opportunity is ripe for disruption. There are no winners. And I personally find that just incredibly inspiring and exciting.
Yeah. And we're working in this space and we're kind of living in it. And so it's very easy to forget the fact that the number of people that are thinking about AI in the same way or as bullish on what AI can do and actively building that, we're in the super minority. Stanford came out with this report a couple weeks ago that made a lot of headlines, but the number of people that are generally more optimistic about AI than they are pessimistic, it was less than 60%, or it was around 60%, which is very low considering the fact that companies are investing billions of dollars into AI and people are planning their resourcing for 2027 around AI. And AI is transforming the way that people think about life and work and society. But even in this stage, a lot of people are still very skeptical about it.
Why do you think that is?
I think that the investment in AI has been primarily successful in enterprises more than they are consumer. I think consumer AI is still evolving. And I think that a lot of the large companies and large players in the space, like Apple, for example, haven't really gotten us to a place where we're truly seeing the value of AI the same way that I'm seeing on my cowork terminal and using it to automate all of the marketing documents and HR documents that I did today. I still can't automate the messages that I send my friends and family on messages, or I can't really automate the way that I schedule my doctor's appointments. And a lot of the things that I still do manually on a day-to-day basis today is a function of the fact that AI innovation in the consumer space hasn't moved as fast.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of interesting the role of Apple in AI implementations of consumer. Like they have that phone locked down and they've done it through the lens of security, but they control that entire walled garden. And if they're not deploying AI in my phone, I don't really know how else as a consumer I would be really consuming AI.
I think that they started to get involved in this model race very early on because that was kind of the only race that existed within AI that early on. But I think that their goal should just be, how can I effectively clone an LLM to sit on my phone and reason through all of the data that I have on my personal phone without actually sending that reasoning out.
Yeah.
I think like that, if they do that, they've done their job very effectively, but they still haven't really gotten there.
Yeah. I mean, I do think they have tons of cash on their balance sheet. And so they don't have to be an organic innovator. I think that they could inorganically acquire innovation here more easily than anyone else.
Yeah.
I think they are still ripping through earnings. Like they still beat. I think with
The new CEO.
yeah, with Tim Cook going out and bringing in somebody from the hardware division, and a lot of the stuff that they've done with like the M2, M3 chips that are really innovative when it comes to innovative silicon and integrated GPUs, that they are positioning themselves to do something that could have the iPhone like wow moment. Like they really do get it. And I'm just expecting that to come out. And I think that will be this new wave of AI consumer, but I do think that they have a stranglehold in many ways on like the AI consumer market when it comes to like the vehicle in which AI needs to be deployed. It needs to be deployed on my phone. And like I have an iPhone like many other people, and they haven't done it yet. So it's almost like there's this pent up demand. Like we're waiting, and we know it's got to happen. There's so much cash in the balance sheet, they can't not swing for it. When's it gonna happen? And it's like almost getting to this crescendo that now it's almost like there's too much pressure to give us a wow factor. And then, but they were able to then come with the most recent earnings announcement. I don't remember what exactly it was, but like they did awesome. Like maybe they're like, hey guys, we don't need this whole AI thing. Sounds great. We're still wildly successful without it.
Well, I think the two things that Apple does very well is hardware. So the things that you were alluding to, and design. Like, yes, the iPhone was transformational in the functionality, but it also invented a lot of the now very normal user experiences, right? Like scrolling, or the way that you toggle, or the way that you zoom in and zoom out. Like they invented a lot of that, right? And so I think that I have this group chat with a bunch of like founders and VC investors, a group of friends that all kind of are very plugged into the startup community. And a while back when we were designing a product for one of our clients, I reached out and I was like, hey guys, like, has anyone seen any kind of user experience focused innovation around how people are using AI? Like, has anyone seen a really good AI product that is not a chatbot or is not chat focused? And everyone was like, no, there's absolutely nothing that I can think of. And I think that Apple is in a really good position to solve for that. Like, how do you actually interact with an LLM while you're on your Messages app, or while you're on your Calendars app, or while you're on your Maps, or while you're FaceTiming your mom? Like, that, I think, is still a very open question that no one has figured out. I don't think that anyone is incentivized or has the ability to figure it out in the way that Apple can and does. And so I think that the way that we interact with LLMs, there's so much potential there. No one's really cracked that yet.
I did buy a Raspberry Pi recently. It's like the third Raspberry Pi that I bought. Hopefully it's not going to be the third Raspberry Pi that I bought and never used. But hopefully this will be like the third one I buy, first one I used, specifically for getting my house, like getting a mic set up so that I can talk to AI and have it actually be useful. One of the first things I have is I also bought one of those the black and white e-ink screens that has that you can like the Kindles, but it's programmable. I have like a border that goes around it so it looks like a picture, and then a Raspberry Pi connected to it. And then I have a Claude Agent SDK running on it with also voice hooked up. And so that I can go and say like, hey, can you go and update this for our calendar for today? Give it access to our calendar and then like kind of go and update. I also put like an MCP server in front of it. I'm using ngrok for that. So like it makes it really easy for me to host a local publicly available service on my Raspberry Pi so that I can then on my Claude chat, so they go, can you go and add this to our to-do list? And then it'll hit the MCP server, generates the XML that I passed to the e-ink display. And so like it then goes and shows up on the display for like within our house. And so I'm just starting down that, but I think that there's a lot of innovation that's happening in like the DIY Raspberry Pi, OpenClaw community right now that there's just so much cool stuff going in the consumer space, but a lot of it seems to be happening DIY.
And as a function of that, it's only really circulating within the people that are already interested in AI in the first place, right? Like no one that's pessimistic or skeptical about AI is going to start DIYing like a home.
Yeah, totally.
You know, right?
Totally.
And I think it's also like I can sympathize with people that are skeptical about AI, especially people that don't work in the space and don't actually see the benefits of it at their jobs, right? Like on one hand, you've got all these headlines around AI is going to get rid of all these jobs. Every company's investing in AI adoption and in cutting people's jobs. And then on the consumer side, there's nothing super innovative. And the things that are gaining traction are like like Sora. Mm-hmm. Like I hated Sora, and you know that. But like if I was not doing what I'm doing and I was assessing everything that's going on from that lens, I would be pretty skeptical and pessimistic too. So,
well, I'm glad you're not looking at it through that lens, and you're looking at it through the lens of, I don't know, the greatest Hedgineer.
The greatest piece of technology that I think we have seen in our lifetimes.
Yeah. And so with that, I just want to thank everyone for tuning in for another episode of the Hedgineer Podcast. Again, I'm your co-host, Michael Watson.
And I'm Jhanvi Virani.
And we will catch you next time. Follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube. We're also on Twitter, Instagram, you name it. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast. And until then, take it easy.
The Hedgineer Podcast releases episodes weekly on Tuesday. Our hosts are Michael Watson and Jhanvi Virani. The Hedgineer Podcast is produced and edited by Aaron Free. Follow us on your social platform of choice and reach out to us at podcast@hedgineer.io.